Welcome to Let's Talk About It Sunday, an extension of KELA's weekday local talk show featuring a variety of subjects of local interest. This program was pre-recorded, so we're unable to take live calls on today's show. And now, let's talk about it.
Welcome to Let's Talk About It Sunday with your host, Peter Abbarno. Today I have my special guest, Centralia Police Department Chief Stacy Denham. We're going to be talking about policing in the city of Centralia and here locally, as well as the Blake decision, because that's going to be the main focus of this show. You may have heard about the Blake decision. I'm sure you have, because the Washington State Legislature actually went into a special session because they didn't, quote-unquote, fix the Blake decision. Well, what was Blake? Blake is an interesting case. Blake was a February 2021 case where the state Supreme Court ruled, in the case of State v. Blake, that Washington's felony drug possession statute was unconstitutional because it criminalized possession even when a person did not know they had possession of a controlled substance. This was a situation where a woman was detained by police officers and they found a controlled substance, drugs, in her pocket of her jeans. What the individual said was, those aren't my jeans. Those are the jeans of my friends, and I didn't know there were drugs in there. 2 months later, in February 2021, so 2 months later, the legislature passed Senate Bill 5476 that passed a temporary measure reducing the penalty for possessing illegal drugs like fentanyl, heroin, and methamphetamines from a felony to a misdemeanor. So the Supreme Court says it's a felony. Now it's nothing. So the legislature ends up saying, hey, even though we can't pass a felony because Democrats in the legislature weren't going to allow for a felony to be passed, they passed a misdemeanor. But that misdemeanor was set to expire in July 1, 2023, so this year. What happened was on the final day of this regular session, when it's going to expire July 1, 2023, Democrats could not get together and figure out what to do. You had an agreement on policy between Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans, and House Republicans, but House Democrats were not in agreement with the gross misdemeanor with a setup that had some teeth. And so nothing happened. We ended up not passing anything in the legislature this year. So the governor called us back for a special session, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we ended up passing. It was a one-day session, but it was a lot of negotiations. There were about 5 or 6 senators and House members that were part of the negotiating team. I was one of those persons who was on the negotiating team. So was another 20th District Representative, Senator John Braun. So we're going to talk a little bit about Blake, but we're also going to talk about the state of policing today, how that impacts, and we're going to have Centralia Police Chief Stacy Denham come on the show and talk a lot about, what's going on in Centralia and how this might impact what they're doing in our community. So stay tuned. Well, Chief Denham, thank you for coming in today and appreciate you taking the time to talk a little bit about what's going on in the city of Centralia, as well as we're going to definitely touch on some of the policing legislation like the Blake decision and the Blake bill.
I appreciate it. I'm glad you invited me and happy to be here to discuss this because it's a really important topic.
So tell me what's going on in Centralia. I mean, how are things going? I mean, aside from just the specifics of policing, how are things going with the department?
The department's going well. We're getting our staffing back up very slowly because it's always difficult to get staffing up. But the morale is really high. The officers are doing really well. And I got to tell you, one, I love my officers. They work really hard, and their end product really shows it. And the citizens of Centralia and anybody who comes here should be proud of their officers because they do such a great job.
What's really great about the police officers in Centralia, and really Chehalis and the sheriff's office too, is I just came back from a law enforcement torch run meeting as part of the law enforcement torch run group for Special Olympics. It's great to see that our officers and our sheriffs are all so involved and integrated within our community and the organizations that are trying to lift it up.
Well, that's just it, right? Because we have this community, not just Centralia, but we have our Lewis County community, if you will. We're not so big that we don't know each other. And we all jump in, and it's our neighbors, it's our brothers, our sisters, and we all get together and we help each other out, and we stand up for each other as well. Like the Special Olympics torch run, law enforcement torch run, and we all get together and we want to make that event, that particular one and others, the best it can be.
Yeah, I mean, I partnered with Ruben Ramirez for many years on the polar plunge.
Oh, yeah.
And he's been just great on it. And the Centralia Police Department Association, the Police Officers Association, is always great because they act as often the fiscal agent for a lot of our Special Olympics donations. And it's great that they always step up and take that kind of leadership role.
Oh, yeah. We jump right into that. Ruben's done a great job, not just with the torch run, but the polar plunge. And we've had other officers behind the scenes and some stepping up to help out when they can. And they jump right in there, and they're really engaged in our community with all aspects of our community. So, again, I'm going to go back and say it again. I'm very proud and love my officers. They do a great job.
Yeah, and if you're just tuning in to Let's Talk About It Sunday, I'm your host, Peter Abbarno. My special guest is Centralia Police Chief Stacy Denham, and we're talking about policing, and we're talking about what's going on, and we're definitely going to hit on the Blake decision because it's in the paper. It's been in a lot of editorials from, in every editorial probably around the state, so we'll definitely want to talk about that possession law. But I want to kind of set a little bit of the stage because it's important to know who your law enforcement officers are and know what they're dealing with and what's going on in the community, and also to know that they're part of the fabric of our community. One of the great things that the Centralia Police Department started when I was on the Centralia City Council was they used to do those district meetings. Mm-hmm. It was one of the first real awesome reach out moments where they would come to each one of the community, whether it's Edison or a kitchen at Bourse Park, and just open it up to anything. Complaints, praise, and anything in between.
Yeah, and we still do that.
Yeah.
In fact, we just did one last month, and we'll be doing them again in about 6 months. And we always welcome we want people to come out and engage with us. We want them to meet the officers and find out who they are and show that we're real people. We have the similar concerns in a lot of cases, but we try to solve whatever problems going on in those communities.
Well, and do you think, I say this a lot in Olympia, that when we pass legislation, whether it's about policing or something else, that it's got to share the values of our community. Every community has a little bit different value system. And one thing that you mentioned off air is one of the unique values we have in our community is that we're close-knit. We know each other. Mm-hmm. How important is that kind of local control flexibility? How important is that to you?
Well, I think it's really important because, whenever we're in a small community like we're in, we sit here and people have my personal phone number, right? And they call me. It doesn't matter if they're here or Morton or wherever they may be. If they're having an issue in Centralia, they know that they can call me. And you don't get that in a lot of communities. And I know that I can reach out to the sheriff. I can reach out to the Chehalis chief or whoever it is. And then we try to work together to solve a problem. And you don't get that in a lot of areas. And I think because our area is so unique and so close-knit that it provides us that opportunity. And that's something, honestly, I don't want to lose because I also know a lot of the business owners. Business owners know me. I come out to their, whenever they're having like our Friday morning coffee, and I go out and talk to them, and I meet them over at some of the coffee shops. I don't drink coffee, but I go there anyway because that is valuable to me and it's valuable to our community.
Yeah, no, most certainly I think that communication, that contact, people don't always have to agree with you or I or anybody else, but what they want to know is that you're listening, you're hearing their concerns, and that you're not just blowing people off. And I think that your system that you've created is really helping with that.
Well, I think it's very important when people have a complaint that there's some way that they can vent that complaint out. And even more important is to actually get an answer. Mm-hmm. Or even if it's, look, I can't do anything for you. Here's the problem I'm dealt with. They want to hear that from the people who actually deal with it and not just get passed around from place to place. And that's the unique thing about us. We do everything we can to reach back out to those folks and let them know if we were able to handle the problem, if we can't, or whatever issues it may be.
And one of the cool things that you have too, and I think you were on the police force when it started. I don't know if you were chief though. The non-emergency website.
Yes.
Because that's been really helpful. And there are folks out there who say, well, I don't know if that works or not. I don't use it. When my vehicle was broken into and I had so much stuff stolen from it, it was my report on that they saw when they ended up doing some drug bust and found my keys and all this stuff. It was actually that report. So that's a really good resource that a lot of folks, it may not be a 911, but you have to report it. That actually worked.
It's worked, and we've actually solved quite a bit of crimes that way. Usually when someone reports that, there's no suspect information. There's really not much to follow up on, so they report it that way. But what they got to understand is we take that information, we take it seriously, and it gets dumped into our data bank. And so when we come across it, nothing like your stuff, we recognize that. And when we find it, we have an avenue to get it back like any other police report that's written.
Yeah, that was a really great resource for us. I know we've used it a number of different times, and I know my neighbors, I've shared it with them when they've seen some creepy guy riding a bike and then slowing down in front of a house and kind of going up the driveway and back. It's not an emergency, but it's also important to report it because you may be scoping the house.
Well, see, and that's one thing we talk about when we go to the district meetings. We are still, because we're a small community, and we still like to respond to calls. And where a lot of agencies you see they're saying they're too busy, they don't respond to a lot of calls anymore. We still respond to everything if possible. Right. And of course, we have to prioritize. But when they don't need a response, that's the best way to get that information out there. They don't have to wait for the officer to show up, but we still enjoy responding. We respond to everything because that's what we feel that our community wants us to do, and we also like to making those contacts with our community members.
Well, and it's kind of like an official. You know how Ring has that kind of thing where on your Ring, so if you have a Ring system on your front door, you could actually punch in not only situations that happen at your house, but it also picks up reports from PD. Official reports. So it's almost like that in a way, because if I report that there's, this creepy guy who's driving up or riding a bike up a driveway and scoping out a house, and someone else sees the same thing, and your officers see all those reports, they're going to start going, there's something more happening here.
Well, and we've solved several crimes just off the Ring cameras themselves, which is really great. When you get a picture of someone stealing your package off the porch, that goes a long way to help us solve that. And when they share that information with us, it's even better yet.
Yeah, that's amazing. So let's get to some of the not so good that's happening, not just in our community, but honestly, I talk to legislators throughout the state of Washington and even in other states. This is happening everywhere. It seems to be more prominent in Washington, especially after the Blake decision in 2021, where there was an effort to decriminalize drugs, honestly. And, the legislature came back a couple months after the Blake decision by the state Supreme Court and said, we're not going to make it a felony anymore. We're just going to make it a misdemeanor. And then we're going to make the law enforcement go through all these hoops before they could even respond. Talk a little bit about the difference you saw from when it was a felony to when this wacky kind of misdemeanor notice system happened.
Well, I'll give you two sides of that. And the first side is what we saw as law enforcement officers. And that is we saw the uptick in the just kind of flagrant use of drugs, and that people didn't care anymore. They're just going to start using drugs, and they just really didn't care.
There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, nothing you can do about it. In fact, when that law initially went through, one of my officers told me, he goes, first thing that happened is I saw this guy hold this crack pipe up, basically in his hand, or his meth pipe up, and said, "Ha ha ha, you can't do anything," and walked off. And we're like, "Yeah, you're right, we can't do anything."
Right.
So
except he's going to run around and keep doing it and hurt people. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's what you get, and then you get that the ability for people just to decide they're going to do it anywhere they want. Not unlike today when I'm walking through Washington Park there at the library, and here's a guy drinking alcohol and another guy smoking marijuana right there. And it's like, we never really saw that before. And now if I'm seeing it, I can only imagine what our communities are seeing and people coming to our area is seeing. They're seeing all this stuff, and I'm assuming they're seeing it everywhere else.
Right.
But we feel it here. And so it kind of detracts from that warm feeling that you get, the small town community vibe that you get when you come to our area, specifically Centralia that I'm referring to. So there's that. And then the officers, my officers are very hard charging. They work really hard, and this was really deflating to them because they felt like they were being punished for doing a bad job.
Right.
And it took a long time for my officers to regroup and to be able to start doing what they do best, and that's arresting people. And I had a lot of officers really considering getting out of law enforcement, specifically because of the Blake law, because they just felt like there's nothing else that they can do. But I'm glad we were able to work through a lot of that.
And it probably also because of the pursuit law.
Well, that was a big piece of it as well.
Right.
I mean, there was obviously multiple laws, but the Blake one really bothered him,
Yeah.
I think even more than the pursuit law, because historically we've only had about 6 pursuits annually.
Yeah.
And right now, and so we've actually almost got to the point where we have a person run from us every day, and we've never had that before. And so that's frustrating, but even with that, the Blake decision specifically was one of those things, because my officers are very passionate about what they do in protecting our community. And this is a huge problem, because not only are they not protecting the community because these people, a lot of the people who use drugs are obviously stealing things as well.
Right.
So we get victimized again, and then they see something that they can't even help the person using drugs, because we have no way, no avenue to help them, no conduit to treatment either.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good point. I begrudgingly voted for the 2021 bill, and the reason why is because if it didn't pass, there would be no misdemeanor. I mean, it would just be totally decriminalized. But it was holding your nose type vote, because you knew this was just going to cause headaches for law enforcement, and it's only a misdemeanor. There's no teeth there. And I think you had to notify or make a record of it somehow 3 times before you could even do anything.
Well, it was 2 times, and
Right.
the sad thing about that is the cart before the horse. Then and now, there is still no way in Washington to document that someone's been warned.
Yeah.
There's none. We had to manufacture something here the best we could, but if someone comes down to Olympia, they could have had 15 warnings, and there's no way that we would know that.
It's crazy. It's crazy to think about that. And that was part of the real problem with that bill that was passed, and then for 2 years it's kind of bumped along.
Right, and it almost gets you to the point where I feel like I'm living in silliness land,
Yeah.
because it's like, why would you do this? Because you're actually hurting your communities more than you're ever going to help them with this. And now, 2 years later, I think that is coming home to roost, because we're seeing the decline of a lot of people, with more people or less people in treatment. We have more overdoses going on, and it's actually tearing our communities apart more than it's ever started helping them.
Well, and I can get more political than you, because you shouldn't as much. I mean, you can do as much as you want, but I mean, Washington State's been controlled really by one party for 30, almost 40 years. It's really a systemic neglect of our mental health system, because we don't have the infrastructure to deal with folks who are going through addiction and having mental health crises. And that can hasn't just been kicked. It was just never kicked at all, right? It wasn't kicked forward. It was just so even, and we're going to talk about the Blake quote unquote fix that we passed here in 2023 in the special session. But that was a policy that's chasing infrastructure, because we still don't have that infrastructure.
Well, not even remotely. We're starting to see a bit of a transition, and I'll give my props out to Cascade Mental Health. They are trying to do the best they can to get an SUD unit, something that we can take people to that are struggling with some type of an overdose, or something where they're standing in the streets and they're a danger to themselves. They're trying to get us something. And that's something we haven't had historically. And so that's still in the infancy stages of it. So I'm really hopeful for that, because that's truly where people need to be. They need to get that treatment and get stabilized.
Well, and that's a good point, because that's what I'm hoping this new quote, and I say quote unquote, I shouldn't say it. I mean, it's going to be so repetitive, because I don't want people to think it fixed Blake, because in the end, it may or may not fix Blake. I think it addresses a lot of our concerns. I think it moves the ball forward. Ultimately, it may not be totally enough, but it's as good a bill as Republicans or conservatives or people concerned with drug overdose and mental health issues is going to get with the makeup of this legislature.
Well, I would agree with that, because everyone kind of talks about the fix. This wasn't a fix. This was a Band-Aid to limp it along, or a crutch, if you will, to limp it along until hopefully some sound minds come along and say, okay, look, we need to fix this once and for all, because right now it's proven that it's not fixed.
Yeah.
So I hate the term fixed, because it's not fixed.
Yeah, and I do too. And I wrote an op-ed in the Chronicle that says I'm using quotes in this because I don't know if it's really a fix. I think it's as good a bill as you're going to get. I think it was the right bill with the makeup of this legislature, but most certainly there's $300 million, $211 in the capital, and I think $100 million plus in operating that's going to go to helping with mental health and addiction treatment. But as you know, that money is not going to get out the door in 1 year, and most certainly is not going to prop up a system and beds in 1 year. It's going to take a while.
Well, and that's only a piece of the cost because now that it's going to be a gross misdemeanor that we can start arresting for people for, I think it's August 14th, I think is the date. All those costs where the state would normally pick up those costs, now it's going to be shifted to the municipalities. Yeah. And that means court costs, that means jail costs, that means all these other costs that go along with it. So where does it begin? And I can tell you that I don't think there's anything, maybe you can tell me, I don't think there's anything in that bill or anything in the state's mind right now that we're going to get reimbursed for some of these costs or all these costs that now are basically the unfunded state mandate that now law enforcement or the municipalities have to deal with.
Well, I think what they're going to do, and I think this was a setup, is that it's not a reimbursement, but there are grants to set up a system to help you set up your system. But most certainly, I think we're going to have to come back in the supplemental budget and say, okay, what are these costs really going to look like? Because as you know, I mean, when the majority is waiving victim impact fees, waiving court costs, waiving all the costs that should be borne upon criminals to help support the court system, it's got to come from taxpayers generally, and it's got to come from Olympia, because you're right. The law enforcement system, the court system alone can't sustain this new program.
Well, and the problem is that I can tell you that our community members didn't sit there and wave the flag and say, boy, you know what? I think this is a great bill. We want to fund this. And it was a decision made by the legislature. And I mentioned earlier, it appears to me that it's an unfunded mandate. We're just going to point at you. We're going to tell you what to do, and you figure it out, and then you fund it on your own, the way you guys want to do it.
Right.
And that's unfair to our community. That's unfair to the people that are actually involved in this, quite frankly. The people that might get arrested or charged with this, because now what's going to happen to them because our community and others, this is going to raise ours tens of, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars for us to be able to deal with. And I can't imagine what that would do with even communities that are less fortunate than we are to be able to fund that. So who's going to fall on the wayside? How many people are going to go without treatment? How many people are going to be overlooked because the department can't afford to get them in the system to get them the help they need?
Right.
This has a very long tail on it of people that it's going to affect, and the outcome is the people who are the people who are using the drugs are being really left out in the cold again.
You are listening to Let's Talk About It Sunday, an extension of KELA's weekday local talk show. Stay tuned. Let's Talk About It Sunday edition will return in a moment.
Okay, and now back to business.
Listen on the air and online.
KELA.
Let's talk about it. Good morning. You're listening to Let's Talk About It Sunday, an extension of KELA's weekday local talk show. This program was pre-recorded, so no live phone calls on today's show.
And if you're just tuning in to Let's Talk About It Sunday, I'm your host, Peter Abbarno. My special guest, Stacy Denham, the Chief of Police in Centralia. We're talking about a lot of things, but right now we're talking about the Blake bill that was passed in a special session. This bill raises it up to a gross misdemeanor. As I call it, gross misdemeanor light. So in the first two offenses, it's 180 days. If you are out on conditional release and your deferral and you violate the conditions of release, and then it goes up to the 364, which would be a traditional gross misdemeanor. It doesn't take away a prosecutor's ability to do the deferred stipulations like they do now. This is just a new pathway. But as you said, even with a new pathway, there's going to be a lot of growing pains, especially fiscal growing pains, as we find out what's this going to cost and where they're going to go. I mean, if you're going to give an option, a court's going to give an option to a treatment, and if you don't have beds and you don't have a workforce to help, like counselors and treatment facilities, there's really no options.
Well, consider this, is that right now, with the least amount of people in treatment that we pretty much have seen for years and years, the beds are already full. Mm-hmm. So when you compile that with, now we're going to try to send more people into treatment, what's that going to do? Our system's already overloaded.
Yeah.
So what are you doing within the meantime? You just kick them out on the street? Where are all these people going to go, and how are they going to get help, and how are they going to get stabilized? That is a huge question that nobody has the answer for.
Yeah, and I think just like the local law enforcement, county commissioners, the legislature is going to have to work itself in and out of this too, because as we said earlier, and maybe a number of times, what the Blake bills did was try to pass policy for an infrastructure that doesn't yet exist. And while they're playing catch up from systemic neglect of a mental health and addiction system that really the majority is ignored.
Well, and you're absolutely correct on that, because the people that it's going to affect the most are the ones they're claiming they're trying to protect. And systemically, they are going to be damaged further until something comes through where if the legislature is creating this, which they have, okay, now you need to step up to the plate again, because with the personnel shortages, the professional shortages that all these things need, we don't have them. So now what?
Yeah, I joke about this in a sad way sometimes, Chief, as I say, you get all these Seattle folks who come down to Olympia and try to implement failed King County policies and failed Seattle policies on a statewide level, and then they leave out communities like ours and others who can probably find better ways to deal with this in a probably much more compassionate way.
Well, and then you get what I refer to as the ripple effect. Seattle's realized, I think, that what they've set up has failed, and so they change their policy mid-stride, and everybody else is still looking at the policy that failed, thinking it's successful.
Right.
Okay. So as that ripple moves, we get people now. Seattle's moving people out of their cities, or changing camping and ordinances and things like that. And now these people are moving out, coming down to us, thinking that they're going to get the same response as Seattle. And so it causes this ripple effect. And that's what we're seeing now, is a lot of people coming down from Seattle, coming down from Tacoma as they shut down camps, or some of the programs they had are going away because they're failed or failing. And now they're using them down here as if they're the gospel, and that's what's going to work.
Yeah, and you said this earlier, and we have mom and pop businesses, and they have Amazons, and we just don't have that private financial investment to actually deal with this. Chief Denham, I appreciate you coming in. We're definitely going to have you back on this fall, see how some of the after August happens, see how some of the reaction of this Blake quote-unquote fix happens. Plus get some updates on some of those local district meetings, and kind of keep an eye on what's going on in our community.
You bet. I'd love to come back.
Yeah, thanks for keeping us safe. That was Chief Stacy Denham from Centralia Police Department. Thanks for tuning in to the Let's Talk About It Sunday show. I'm your host, Peter Abbarno. Feel free to make sure you tune in every single Sunday. And then during the week, Monday through Friday, we have the Let's Talk About It show, which is on at 8:30 in the morning on AM 1470 KELA. Have a great day, and we'll talk next week.